All right. Hi, everyone, and welcome to tonight's edition of the Berkeley Forum. My name is David Lee, and I'm currently the forum's Vice President of Events. We're so excited to welcome everyone to tonight's event with Dr. Ruth Simmons. A couple of items before we get started tonight. You can fill in our attendance form for the event at tinyurl.com/SimmonsAttendance. And of course, if you have any questions for our speaker tonight, fill in our form at tinyurl.com/SimmonsQuestions. As we do at all of our events, the Berkeley Forum would like to take this time to acknowledge that our events and UC Berkeley's campus sit on the territory of the Ohlone people and that we benefit from the occupation of this land. It is important to us that we recognize this history out of respect to the Nwe'kma Ohlone, who are still present in Berkeley and the Bay Area today. For more Native education resources on campus, we encourage you to look into the Centers for Educational Justice and Community Engagement. And with that, I'll hand it off to Brian Kim, our event manager tonight.
It is my honor to welcome Dr. Ruth Simmons to the Berkeley Forum. Ruth J. Simmons serves as president of Prairie View A&M University. She was president of Brown University from 2001 to 2012. Under her leadership, Brown made significant strides in improving its standing as one of the world's finest research universities. A French professor before entering university administration, President Simmons held an appointment as a professor of comparative literature and Africana studies at Brown. Simmons was also president of Smith College, the largest women's college in the United States. At Smith, she launched a number of important academic initiatives, including an engineering program, the first at American Women's College. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Ruth Simmons, as well as tonight's moderator, Aaliyah, to the virtual stage.
Thank you, Dr. Simmons, for coming to speak here today. It's a pleasure to have you at the forum. Again, if you have a question and you're in the audience, please fill out the form in the comments section. So for my first question of the evening, Dr. Simmons, I'd like to ask you a question about your early career. You've had leadership experience across a diverse array of institutions in higher education, such as serving as a president of a women's college, an Ivy League school, and historically Black college and university, or HBCU. What drove your interest in a career in university administration?
Well, to understand my interest, I would have to tell you a little bit about my childhood. I was born in 1945 and grew up during the Jim Crow era. And of course, we all know now that during that period of time, Blacks were prevented from having access to most institutions of learning, as well as to even stores and restaurants and so forth. And so we grew up with the idea that we were less than, not entitled to the same privileges that other citizens had. And as a child, of course, seeing that my parents and grandparents had been through the same situation, I naturally assumed that the same fate awaited me. But I had the good fortune to go to school and to fall in love with learning. And one of the marvelous things about being in school and living in books and being able to develop my imagination, I created an alternative environment for myself that gave me hope for the future. And so while I could not go freely about the world, I could certainly do that in books. My family was quite poor and did not have the means to send me to college. But because I had wonderful public school teachers, they perceived that I could do well in college, and they encouraged me to apply, and they helped get me off to college. But here's the thing that I discovered along my college years. I was living in a segregated environment until I was 17 years old, completely segregated. I had not the opportunity to interact with people who were different from me. But something told me when I was 17 that there was more to life than this reality. And so I took off on a Greyhound bus and went to Mexico when I was the summer of my 17th year to live with a Mexican family and to study Spanish. And that started, that fueled a drive in me to learn more about different people. To be in an environment for the rest of my life where I could say that I was a part of the human race and I could benefit greatly from learning from people very different from me. Well, I thought if college can afford that, it must be the most wonderful thing in the world. And why should I ever want to leave university life if it's such a wonderful learning experience? And so I stayed on that track from undergraduate school to graduate school, and then entered the professoriate, thinking that I would spend my life in this environment. And it was the best decision I made.
Thank you for sharing your story as well as your personal narrative and how it brought you to higher education. So you touched upon how the teachers in your life drove you to higher education. So I was wondering if you could answer, what unique role, if any, can teachers or administrative leaders play in improving outcomes for students, particularly those from underrepresented backgrounds?
Well, I always say to teachers that their role is all important, frankly. Sometimes the only thing standing between a child of poverty and disaster is the intervention of a teacher. Think of the things that schools give our children who have not the means to make their way safely in the world. They may not have food to eat and they go to school and they get food. They may not have anybody to tell them that the future offers hope, except when they go to school and somebody presents them with opportunities that they dare not imagine for themselves. So I think that we have entered a period in this country where we very much underestimate the role of teachers. To me, it is everything. And I often tell the story of, when I asked my mother if I might go to college one day, she had this look on her face and my heart sank because I knew what that look meant. That look meant, how on earth would we ever be able to afford to send you to college? But here's what my teachers did. I had a teacher who insisted that I apply to college. And she not only did that, but she persuaded Dillard University to give me a scholarship. And then a group of teachers got together and went into their closets and packed their clothes for me to take off to college. That's not an apocryphal kind of story. That's the kind of thing that teachers do every day. So we have to lift up this profession. We have to extol the teachers who are willing to give their lives to help students. And most of all, we have to support public schools, because those children who only have access to a way out of desperation through public schools need those schools. They need them to be strong. They need them to offer the kind of instruction that will take them and their families to safety and to security.
Thank you for sharing your insight, Dr. Simmons. Related to education, and more particularly as it relates to higher education, in a recent ABC interview, you stated that you want HBCU schools to be on the same tier as Ivy League campuses. In your opinion, what challenges, if any, do HBCUs face that may place them on an uneven field compared to Ivy Leagues?
Well, history works against HBCUs. First of all, I'm busy now writing a graduation speech, and I was thinking of including some of this in my graduation speech. But here's what many people perhaps don't understand. Institutions become strong over a period of time because they're building on a succession of advances enabled by a wide range of individuals and entities. And so if you look at the history of a university like Berkeley, you might go back and you'd see that at one time, as Berkeley is starting, it's doing laudable things, to be sure, but as time goes on, decade after decade, building on the strength of the previous era, it gets stronger and stronger and emerges as, one of the best universities in the country. Well, African-American institutions and to some extent other minority serving institutions didn't have that assistance. So what was missing? First of all, Prairie View was founded during Reconstruction, right after Reconstruction. And it was founded to be a place for colored youth who, of course, were not intelligent enough to be in a learning environment with whites. So it was built to be inferior. And because it was built to be inferior, inadequate support was provided for it. And so the parallel would have been another university founded at the same time, getting generous help from the state, generous help from the federal government, generous help from donors. And so that institution is building on success generation after generation. HBCUs were largely starved over a long period of time. So there is a lot that we need to do. Number one, to acknowledge the truth of that history. Number two, to understand that in spite of that, most of us who managed to come through higher education at one point came through HBCUs that suffered that indignity and that lack of support. And yet we managed to not only survive, but we managed to add greatly to what the country is able to offer. So in my view, it is time for HBCUs to receive the attention that they need. It is time for them to receive the support that they have not had for many, many decades. And it is time for major universities to stop treating HBCUs as second-class citizens all over again.
In regards to support for HBCUs, last year, Prairie View A&M received a $50 million donation from Mackenzie Scott, an amount that is comparable to donations often made to Ivy League schools. What role, if any, does such financial support have in supporting HBCUs in the communities they serve?
Well, of course, it's very important. So let me also raise another datum that your participants are probably familiar with, and that is the immense wealth gap between African Americans and other populations in the country. We love to forget about slavery. It's so uncomfortable to have to think about that again. Oh, that again. But the reality is that we were free labor for many years, making wealth possible for others. And upon the freeing of slaves, there were no opportunities for former slaves to to build wealth. That means that the generations to follow them did not have the benefit of accruing and benefiting from that wealth that their forebears passed on to them. And so that gap has continued up to the present day. And we are told that it will be exacerbated greatly by the COVID and crisis. And so what does that mean for historically Black institutions? It means that those who would want to endow those institutions do not have the means to do that. There are very few African Americans who have wealth at that level. And so Mackenzie Scott has done something remarkable, as have others who recently made similar donations. And that is acknowledge that that it is the duty of everybody, not just African Americans, to support these institutions because of the work that they have done in building this country. And so I applaud her fully for her generosity to so many institutions, minority serving institutions in particular, and for the statement that it makes about what the country needs to do in this moment to make good on the promise of freedom and justice and equality.
Beyond just financial support, while many schools have committed to creating diverse and inclusive environments through funding such as Mackenzie Scott's donation, a 2016 study by the National Survey of Student Engagement found that Black students are more than twice as likely as other students to feel unsafe on campuses that are not historically Black. In your opinion, how can university administrations provide effective and holistic support for communities of color on campus?
Well, it saddens me greatly to recognize today that the progress we had hoped to make over time in this regard has been a bit of a chimera. When I see students today on these campuses and they report the same feelings of alienation and disrespect and aggression and hostility, I think immediately that we're not doing enough in the educational realm to make sure that we are preparing human beings to live in a diverse society. Look at the state of the country today. Asians, Americans, and the Pacific Islanders being attacked. What is that? Jewish people worshiping in a synagogue being attacked. I think that we are in crisis in terms of our understanding of what our duty is as citizens living in a multicultural world. Universities must, and schools must be first in line to tackle that issue and to put in front of students the absolute necessity to work on understanding the importance of mediating difference. And so I think one must be thoughtful about it. One must be careful to give people their rights, to be sure. But I think we often miss opportunities in our universities to model behavior for our students. I used to say to every group of students who came to Brown for April hosting, I would make roughly the same kind of speech to them. I said, if you do not intend to come to college to get to know people who are very different from you, who hold different views, who come from different parts of the world, who are different color or are a different sexual preference. Do not come to Brown. We don't want you here. Now, the students laughed when I said that because they thought I was joking, but I wasn't joking at all. And so as a university president, one of the things that I try to do is to speak plainly about these values and how important, how critical they are to the health of the country. And I spend a lot of time talking to students and urging students to play a role in this battle. And that is to say, don't just leave college and go back to your enclaves and enjoy the sameness of people who are like you. Commit yourself to being fully in the world and having acquaintances and friends of every kind of difference. Because when you do that, you are stronger as an individual. You mediate conflict better. You are more sensitive to the needs of society if you do that. And so I think that's what we should be doing as universities, not missing a single opportunity to stress how important it is to uphold these values, the values of respect for others, the values of listening to people who are different from us, the values of not disparaging people because of the way that they look, because of the way that they wear their hair, because of the way that they walk or talk. It seems so basic, and that's maybe why many people don't bother, but it's not basic at all. It turns out it's pretty darn difficult because we are still grappling with it and trying to figure out a way to solve this age-old problem.
You highlighted the importance of universities creating a welcoming and diverse environment for not just students of color, but the entire student body, as well as your experience as president of Brown. And according to a 2007 poll from the Brown Daily Herald, you held an 85% approval rating from student responses supporting your presidency at Brown. How have you approached meeting the interests and demands of the student body and navigating what you mentioned in creating a welcoming and diverse environment for all students?
I missed a part of that. How did I do what?
How have you approached meeting the interests and demands of the student body? And as you mentioned, maintain this diverse environment that you value?
Well, the most important thing for leadership on campuses is to fully embrace students. And I used to go into the student center at Brown, and I'd stand in a spot, and then students would come up, line up and come up, and I'd give them hugs. I love my students. I want them to understand that they are never less than. I want them to understand that I have respect for their efforts. I want them to understand that I want to know them. I think many universities are involved in counting. They want a nice postcard picture that typically would have, a Latino student, an Asian student, a Black student, a white student. And so they want this rainbow picture to demonstrate that they are open and accepting of difference. But the question is what's behind that picture? And when people ask me, why are these students so unhappy? Because, they're here. We admitted them. They have access to all of this plenty. Why are they so unhappy? My answer to them is because they are missing the one thing that you will not give them. And that is an embrace. That embrace tells them that they matter, that you have respect for them, that they belong here. And that's what universities, all institutions really need to do. I would say the same thing if I were in the, in the corporate world. I'd say the same thing. As human beings, I guess much of this is attributable to the way that I grew up. I mean, imagine growing up when people are openly saying that you are unworthy, that you will never be anything, just by virtue of your race. You can never aspire to be anything other than a maid. Imagine that. And imagine the impact, as Frantz Fanon so famously disclosed, imagine the impact of that across time in a person's life. And we see people acting out all the time because they have never received that embrace. Our country belongs to all of us. The university you go to belongs to all of you. You can claim it as any other student can claim it. And you need to feel the power of that, because in that power comes a kind of firing of the synapses that enables you to do things that you hardly ever imagined you'd be able to do. That's what acceptance does. So that's what I hope that, that's what I try to do for my students at Prairie View. That's what I try to do for my students at Brown and at Smith.
Thank you for sharing your insights, Dr. Simmons. So beyond the administrative level, some student-led organizations have argued that these administrative efforts alone are insufficient in making higher ed spaces more equitable for students of color. Beyond the administrative level, what reform, if any, is necessary to make higher ed spaces more equitable?
Well, policies are certainly very important. So here's the conflict within university life. The university life is fundamentally elitist, fundamentally. We have students compete to be admitted. We laud them when they achieve more than their peers. We have a whole set of things that we do, both at the faculty level and the student level, that essentially says that you have to perform, or you will be treated as less than the way others are treated. So fundamentally, I would say in our policies, we have to find a way to get beyond the differentiation that we make on our campuses among the people who manage to go to public schools and those who went to private schools, among the people who can afford to go to Switzerland for a skiing trip, and those who have not one red cent to spend, and so on. So I think people feel those divisions, those differences, and what they have brought from their communities and from their families, where they've already experienced those disparities. They should not be magnified on a college campus, and that's actually what happens. Many of the students that I speak to feel very troubled by the college experience, because it exacerbates feelings that they had as children growing up, especially without any advantages. And so I think universities have begun to organize groups around people with specific origins, like first-generation students and so on. But I rather think that it's going to take something really, forgive me, more central to have an impact on this issue, because that acceptance, that elitism promulgates ideas about the presence of those students that a club will not eradicate. And so some of that is leadership. Some of that is the way that we hire people. Some of that is the way that we treat individuals who are disparaging to students who come from certain backgrounds. We have a lot of problems in universities. Some of it is disguised by free speech issues and so on. But in my view, leadership requires us to send the right message to all of our employees, to all of our faculty about our expectations. That's not illegal. It's perfectly okay to say to every individual who works on a campus, here's what I expect of you when it comes to your treatment of students. So that equality, I can't overstate how important it is that equality be felt and that it be real and not just a picture postcard or a statement. Because that can ring hollow when you are walking across a campus and people are disparaging you. That can be exceedingly hollow.
A few weeks ago at the forum, we had a panel on Black Lives Matter. In 2020, the Black Lives Matter movement rose again to global headlines, raising awareness of anti-Black racism and violence. As a president of Prairie View, how, if at all, has this movement informed your leadership and guidance of an HBCU?
Well, first of all, I retired from Brown thinking that I would never have another position. In fact, I was looking forward to that. But recognizing the state of the country, I really wanted to weigh in with the way that our young people are experiencing the world today. And this is, of course, before the heinous murder of George Floyd. But it was already pretty clear that we were headed for a very difficult time, where people, many people saw Black lives as just easily disposable. At Prairie View in particular, we had a student, Robbie Tolan, who had gone to Prairie View and had been a professional baseball player, visiting his parents. The police mistook him for a car thief in his parents' driveway, and they shot him. He survived that, but that's pretty close to home for us. Sandra Bland was on her way to campus, having secured a job at Prairie View. She was stopped just outside the gates to the campus for a minor traffic infraction, minor, and was taken off to jail, where she was found dead in her cell. So for this community, these are day-to-day events that require us to teach our children the dangers of being Black in our country. And as a mother, I can tell you that for me and every other mother I know, that we are now doing the same thing that our parents did for us. So our parents, when I was growing up, explained to us that we had to step off the sidewalk when whites were approaching, that we could not speak directly or even look a certain way to white people because we could be summarily harmed if we did. And they spent great time and effort teaching us how to be in a world that was hostile to us. And now we find we're doing the same thing for children today. So to me, it is urgent that we help young people deal with the issue of racism and commit to a lifelong effort to address the problem of racial bias and racial hatred in the country. And so that's why I came out of retirement thinking that that was my duty, given what I had experienced, given what people had done for me. It was now my turn to try to do that for students at Prairie.
For the sake of time, this will be my last question before we move on to audience questions. What unique role, if any, do you think, given your experiences, does the education sector play in addressing structural racism, specifically anti-Black justice?
It's all important. All important. First of all, I'm shocked that people still don't seem to get it. Racism is racism is racism. And that's why I tell my students, you should be just as vigilant, just as upset by the attacks on Asian Americans as you would be attacks on African Americans, because it is all related. And it all arises from the same kind of beliefs. None of us is safe when some of us are so at risk from racial bias. And so education is the key. And so what we're doing is working to try to make sure that the curricula in our schools appropriately deals with these issues. And as you know, for some time, people have blocked the capacity to deal forthrightly with these issues in schools. And so we've got to start when children are just starting out in school. And we certainly at the university level have to step it up in terms of helping people understand at a much deeper level what racism is all about, who benefits and who does not, why it is so profitable for many, what impact demagogues have on moving societies to extreme positions with regard to harming segments of society. This is very important for well-educated people to understand because it is not beyond the possibility that we could teeter and topple over in the direction of a Nazi Germany. I don't want to overstate that, but I think we have seen signs in recent months that tell us how razor thin the margin is for us in this country. That means everybody should be on their toes. Every educated person has to sign up for this work. Every school has to be teaching children to understand and accept others. I don't see any way we can do it if it doesn't happen that way.
Thank you for answering all my questions, Dr. Simmons. I will now move on to questions from the audience. And my first question is from Sean. COVID has affected universities immensely, whether that be financially or culturally. Minority communities, of course, have been hit hardest by the pandemic. How has your role evolved or changed as a head of an HBCU during these times?
Thank you, Sean. You know, I've felt more of, I would say, a pastor during these times than I have at most times in the past, because the suffering has been immense. When I think about students who've lost family members to COVID, when I think about the jobs that have been lost and the economic devastation in their communities, when I think about they're looking ahead and finding few prospects for success. When I think about the fact that they come to a point where they have to drop out because there's really no way for them to continue financially, it has been exceedingly difficult. And when I talk about that embrace, I would say that embrace has been more important in these moments than at almost any moment in my time as a university administrator. And so I try to comfort, I try to point students to ways forward that will make them feel more in control of their destiny. Because one of the things that's very hard when you go through a period like this is you can begin to feel that there is nothing you can do that will alleviate the situation. And so sometimes we have to point the way to something that will alleviate the situation. And sometimes, sometimes it's a very small thing that we do that helps. And I'll sometimes pick students out and say, I'd love to be your mentor. It always shocks them when I do that. But sometimes what students need is they need some help getting through a period of time when they really cannot sort out what the next step is because things are so dire right now. So when I say that I'm more of a pastor now than I think I've been at any point in my time as an administrator, I really mean that. I mean, I feel that way because the need to comfort is always there. The need to help is always there. The need to provide solutions is always there. Triage has been a big part of our lives during this year. We never know what it's going to take because of the various things that students are going through. So I think COVID will have changed us in remarkable ways. We don't know what it will mean for students to come back in the fall, what degree of normalcy, so-called normalcy we'll have. But wouldn't it be wonderful if, because of COVID, we were a better place? We were closer, more forgiving, more magnanimous in our thinking. Generous intellect is a very important gift, and that means there have been moments when I was a student where I thought I admired a faculty member who was brilliant, who had the capacity to say, well, gee, I don't understand that. And I don't know that. Can you help me understand it? That's a wonderful talent. And it helps to bond people. And so wouldn't it be great if when we came back from COVID, we were less competitive with each other and more supportive? It's one of the great things I love about Brown. It's an environment where students help each other. That competitive edge is really very submerged there. I saw very little of it there. It's a culture that promotes students helping each other. And I'd like to see that when we return from COVID.
Thank you, Dr. Simmons. This will be my last question from the audience, and an anonymous person from the audience asks, how do you think your administrative experience has differed across Smith College, Brown, and Prairie View, considering that they are each different types of institutions?
I get asked that question. That's probably the most common question that I'm asked. I get asked it so much that at a certain point, I kind of ruled it out of order. You may not ask, you may ask any question other than this question, because I always say embedded in that question, when it's not your question, but it's typically asked to suggest, how can you possibly go from an Ivy League university to a historically Black college? It must be radically different. So how do you cope with that? So here's what I think, and here's what I say. To me, learners are learners wherever you find them. And when I think about the different environments that I've been in, I see the same kinds of aspirations, the same kinds of challenges that students face. I see the same kind of potential. And so to me, the student who is sitting in that seat at the time is someone that I have to approach where they are, not where I want them to be, but where they are. And what's so wonderful about my work at Prairie View is that many of the students at Prairie View actually need my assistance. They need the faculty, because I can assure you that the growth that they experience coming from the environments that they often come from is exponentially greater than the growth typical college students face. And so I would say at Smith, it was wonderful to be, as a woman, it was wonderful to be head of a women's college and to think about the empowerment of women at a time when we still are seeing that women are not treated equally. They don't have access to the same opportunities. They are not paid equally. And to be in that environment, trying to work toward that end was incredible. And then to go on to Brown and to be a part of an environment where students are wonderful and brilliant, but still searching to define a path to save the world. Very idealistic, very motivated to do good things. And then to be at Prairie View and to think that typically when we do graduation, there's one thing we know, that for most of the students who are graduating, they are the lifeline for their families. They will take their families into the middle class. That's a powerful, powerful thing to be able to do as an institution, to know that you're going to have that kind of impact on families and on students. So they're different opportunities, but each one was a thrilling opportunity for me. And in some ways, I think my final assignment here at Prairie View is more timely than any that I've done. I didn't expect the country to be where it is today. When I took on this job, I knew that we were headed for a difficult patch. But when I think about the fact that we are in the midst of one of the most painful and uncertain periods in our history, and it's all about race, and racism and inequality and disparities, historic disparities. I cannot imagine being in a better place than I am now, because what a way to be able to contribute to that. And so I'm very happy doing this work at this moment.
Thank you so much again, Dr. Simmons, for speaking with us tonight. It was a pleasure to have you here at the forum.
Thank you. Pleasure meeting you.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Simmons and Aaliyah, for that incredible conversation. I personally learned a lot, and I know a lot of the members of our audience learned a lot as well. So like I mentioned earlier in our call, we do like to give a little, I guess, surprise for our speakers at the end of all of our events. And of course, this event is no different. So this is a custom poster created by our communications department. And this particular poster was designed by Ashna Desai. And Dr. Simmons, if you want to go ahead and give a couple closing remarks, that'd be fantastic.
Oh, that is wonderful. I recognize the outfit that I'm wearing, and I must say I love it. I have great admiration for your university for a host of reasons. One of which is what it has represented in the landscape of higher education in terms of probing some of the questions that we've been talking about tonight. So it's been a great pleasure for me to be with you tonight and to have an opportunity to talk about these subjects with you because of the incredible history that you represent. Thank you so much.
Again, thank you so much, Dr. Simmons. And a couple of closing things. So of course, we want to recognize all of the incredible people within the forum who made this event possible. So thank you all so much for your hard work. And a couple upcoming events. So we are hosting Mark Safaric, a member of the FBI's Elite Behavioral Analysis Unit, on the 19th of April at 5 p.m. So we hope to see everyone there. And thank you everyone so much for coming. If everyone could go ahead and fill out our feedback form at tinyurl.com/forumfeedbackspring21, that'd be fantastic. And last thing, if you could help financially support us, that would be fantastic. Any amount goes towards putting on more events. And our Venmo is at the Berkeley Forum. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this edition of the Berkeley Forum, and we hope to see you again soon at another event.
Well done.